Week 2 of the XFL season is in the books, and just like we did in Week 1, there were a lot of highs, a lot of lows, and a lot of players and teams that, well, they just blow. Specifically, Paxton Lynch. But before we get to the Broncos bust, we're going to start with me and Darren's favorite team, the DC Defenders, who played in some very interesting conditions. We got our first look at the Vipers field, and it sure was something. The Vegas Vipers play at Cashman Field, which was originally built as a baseball stadium, but later renovated for soccer, and it was bad. The field conditions were clearly horrible, and it made it hard to play. It really didn't help that it was a rain game, though. Vegas missed 2 field goals, and one of them was actually a very short 23-yard field goal that Bailey Giffen just missed because he literally slipped. He went up to kick the ball and just slips. There were 4 fumbles, and both teams basically just had to run the ball. They had 320 combined rushing yards, but the defenders did outrush the Vipers 229-91. Vegas got on the board early, but it wasn't because of the success of the Vipers offense. Jordan Teamu got strip sacked early deep in the defenders' territory, and it set up just a very easy Vipers drive that ended up in a DeAndre Torrey touchdown. Vegas didn't even score again, though, and the defenders did end up coming back and taking full control in a 15-point fourth quarter. Derek King showed off some of his mobility in a pretty nifty rushing touchdown before Abram Smith scored with 8 minutes remaining to put the defenders up 18-6. The defenders' run game was very clearly the key to the game. DC ended up having 3 players with over 50 yards. Abram Smith had 71, Jordan Teamu 68, and Raquel Armstead picked up 58. Teamu did have another pretty rough outing throwing the ball with only 93 yards, and he completed less than half of his passes. Josh Hammond was the only defender to have more than 20 yards receiving, with just 24. The passing game has been a bit of an issue for the defenders, and it appears that is still the case, but DC is 2-0, while the Vipers dropped to 0-2. Vegas started Luis Perez again, but Vegas ended up benching him for Brett Hundley. Perez completed only 1 of his 5 passes, while Hundley came in and went 11 of 18 for 98 yards and rushed for 24 yards. Rod Smith ended up having a pretty rough day on the ground, but he ended up with a big 27-yard rush that helped him finish with 38 yards. Overall, it was a pretty rough day for the Vipers offense. The other XFL North matchup of the week was a nail-biter between the St. Louis Battlehawks and the Seattle Sea Dragons on Thursday. Seattle ended up actually getting off to a very, very hot start. Ben DiNucci hit Ja'Cour Pearson for a deep 54-yard touchdown, and they actually followed it up with a 3-point conversion to Josh Gordon to go up 12-0 in the second quarter, including an earlier field goal that they hit. Of course, the Battlehawks weren't going anywhere. AJ McCarron found the end zone before the half to go into the break trailing 12-8. St. Louis hit a single field goal in the third quarter that made it 12-11 Seattle, heading into a very important fourth quarter, and it was a fun one. With 7 minutes left, AJ McCarron found Hakeem Butler for a 44-yard touchdown that put the Battlehawks on top, but then Ben DiNucci answered. The Sea Dragons drove down and scored from 8 yards out on a pass to Jordan Vesey on 4th and goal to go up 18-17 with only 1 minute left. AJ McCarron still had some magic left, though. He took the Battlehawks 50 yards in a minute 21 to set up a 44-yard game-winning Donnie Hagman field goal, who had missed 2 kicks earlier to win 20-18 and improve to 2-0 and drop the Sea Dragons to 0-2. McCarron was the best player on the field for the Battlehawks. As you'd expect, he passed for 184 yards and a touchdown and led all Battlehawks with 41 rushing yards, a lot of which came on that final drive, and he had that touchdown. Hakeem Butler finished with a solid day, 61 yards and a touchdown on 4 receptions. Ben DiNucci ended up performing a lot better than week 1. He had 200 yards and 2 touchdowns without an interception interception, and he rushed for 38 yards. Morgan Ellison had 50 yards on only 10 carries, and he caught 4 passes for 24 yards. Ja'Cour Pearson had 4 catches for 78 yards and a touchdown, and Blake Jackson had a team-high 5 receptions for just 26 yards. The Dragons have lost back-to-back close games, while the Battlehawks have won back-to-back on late field goals. The Defenders and Battlehawks are both 2-0. The only other 2-0 team in the XFL is the Houston Roughnecks, who hosted the Arlington Renegades on Sunday. It was a very back-and-forth game. The Renegades got off to a pretty unfortunate start on the first play from scrimmage. Drew Plitt was picked, and it turned into a quick Roughnecks 3-0 lead. The Renegades had a punt on their next drive, and will likely return the punt 42 yards and put Houston from 5 yards out, where Brandon Silvers hit Nick Holy for the score before converting on a 2-point conversion to go up 11-0. Now, it looked like Houston might run away with it, but Arlington did actually dominate the second half. Drew Plitt connected with Lawan Winningham for a 4-yard touchdown after a Houston fumbled punt, and then he later found Nate Becker from 13 yards out after, yes, another Houston fumbled punt, and they converted a 2-point conversion to go up into the half, 14-11, but the Renegades didn't even score again. Houston scored early in the third on a 15-yard pass to Cedric Byrd, and they never looked back. A 4-yard Max Borghi touchdown in the fourth gave the Roughnecks some insurance in a 23-14 win to improve to 2-0 and drop the Renegades to 1-1. Both quarterbacks completed exactly half of their passes. Brandon Silvers passed for 173 and 2 touchdowns, while Plitt had 120, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions as well. Now, I will say, Silvers had a pretty bad pick that got called back, but, on the stat sheet, you obviously don't see that. The Roughnecks' leading rusher was actually backup quarterback Cole McDonald, who had 39 yards on 7 carries. Houston had 2 receivers with over 50 yards, Ben Putman with 65, and Jontre Kirkland with 56. The Renegades did not have a receiver with 40 yards, and they only had 43 total rushing yards in the loss. Arlington continues to be a horrific offensive team, but lucky for them, there is simply no way any team in the XFL is worse than the Orlando Guardians. The Orlando Guardians have just by far been the worst team in the league and absolutely sucked again in week 2 at home against the San Antonio Brahmas. You could say that the Guardians head coach Terrell Buckley is starting to get frustrated.
Coach, how do you change this momentum?
We got to get different guys in there. Obviously, I got guys out there that are not competing, that are not making plays. So we got to get people in there, young men that want to play, that want to compete and make plays.
I just saw you walk up and down this sideline and look some guys in their faces. What did you see out of your team?
I'm seeing guys not performing. Look at the scoreboard. They got to perform.
Thank you, Coach.
Thank you.
You don't see many situations where a head coach throws his entire team under the bus, but when it happens, it's absolutely hilarious, and it's hard to blame him. Orlando is terrible. The Brahmas started off with the ball and immediately marched down and scored on a 3-yard touchdown from Jack Cohn to Dion Yelder. Surprisingly, the Guardians did turn around and put together a very nice 7-play drive that ended with a Paxton Lynch touchdown to Eli Rogers. The only scoring in the second half was a San Antonio touchdown to Elise Mack from 19 yards out. The Brahmas led 13-6 at the half, and it looked like it could have been a close game, but that just wasn't the case. In the third, Jalen Tolliver scored a 24-yard touchdown, and then San Antonio ended up blocking a punt that set up a very easy 1-yard John Hilleman score to extend the lead. Orlando did score a touchdown in the fourth quarter, a 4-yard pass from DeAndre Francois to Cody Latimer. It was too little too late for the Guardians, though, and Orlando dropped to 0-2 after a 30-12 loss. Meanwhile, the Brahmas picked up their first win of the season. Jack Cohn played fantastic. He had 165 yards and 3 touchdowns, and even tied Kalen Ballage for the most rushing yards for San Antonio at 23. I think a lot was expected of Ballage. He has been pretty disappointing in 2 weeks so far. Elise Mack ended up being the Brahmas' leading receiver with 48 yards and a touchdown off of 4 receptions. Orlando's quarterback issues did continue. Paxton Lynch only had 79 yards and a touchdown. DeAndre Francois ended up coming in and also completed less than half of his passes for only 8 yards with a touchdown and an interception. Jermaine Martin picked up 49 yards on 9 carries, and the Guardians' top receiver was Javonte Payton, who had 47 yards on 3 catches. I feel like the play of the XFL is improving week to week, and I am starting to enjoy it more and more, but Paxton Lynch does not look to be improving, which honestly just makes it even more fun to watch every week.